more, because many people was asking, we were doing mass GNU. GNU is mass in the immigration because the people don't know about this also. It will be good to this relation and the experience also for the students and the people know about the GNU mass and immigration. Maybe many people from Africa and other parts of the Asia also can join us for this wonderful program and the GNU.
Yes. No, we have programs for specifically for many African countries also. But there are many programs. I think we have with the Uganda and with the I think some countries like last year we launched with some another African countries, Kenya, and we have program for many other countries. So good that people are interested also in our program, and this program, especially migration, is not offered in many universities. This is a very unique program, upcoming program in many universities. Around, I think across the globe, 10 universities are offering, and this is
It's true.
growing field. This is a very growing field because
Yes.
migration, you see, any policy comes in the globe affect the migration, whether it's
Yes,
climate
yes.
change, whether it is anything. Migration is actually underemphasized, but it's a very important area. So
Yes.
you can see now Trump all related to migration, whether it is
Yeah. Yes.
no,
Yes.
uh, and entire Europe. You see, migration is a very important area which affect their election outcome, everything.
Yeah.
So okay, sir. Now
Yes,
you can go ahead.
yes, yes. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Dr. Sadanan. And again, good evening to all of you, to the class. This is, as I said, this is MPSC 5, State and Society in Africa. And today is the final concluding class, the fifth class on February 9th. Just let me do a small brief recap of the things that we have done before we try to wrap up. We started out with unit 1, 2, 3, like introducing Africa as a continent. As we all know, I think there are a lot of notions, misnotions, misconceptions, conceptions, ideas, perceptions, misperceptions about Africa. So we try to discuss about Africa, and some people think Africa is just like a very mysterious place, a mysterious continent. Maybe it's very homogeneous, but actually, if you go deep inside the black box kind of things, I mean, inside the continent, then we get to know, we can unravel the mystery, and we can see how heterogeneous they are. They're so different, like apples are different than oranges. The society, the clans, the tribes, the different societies. Eastern Africa is different from Western Africa, Southern Africa, Northern Africa, Central Africa. So there is a lot of diversity kind of things. But again, having said that, just like any other plural societies like our country, India, or um, United States, and many other societies which are plural or diverse societies, or multicultural societies, or multilingual societies. There is also something called a very unique and distinctive about Africa as a continent, which I think is reflected in the Africanness, or in the African heritage, African history, the very proud history of Africa. So I think that's very important. And again, as Dr. Sadanand just said, when you add this entire discourse on the state society of Africa, along with this migration, the migration patterns, both within intra Africa and also Africa with other countries, and also within the different states of Africa, within different countries of Africa, I think that makes it much more enriching, much more engrossing, and also much more enlightening. So I think there is a lot to know about it. The good, the bad, the upside, the downside, the strength, the weaknesses, limitations. So I think it's a very rich area. It's a very cutting edge area and niche area. I think we all need to know more about it. So that's the Africa that we introduced about in terms of the language, in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of tribes, in terms of socio-economic developments, in terms of culture. I mean, you name it. We have got the whole plate, and whole menu is full. Then we went on to the colonial legacies. Africa, just like India and many other countries in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, even the first half of the 20th century, including our country, India, we went through these colonial experiences. Like, for example, in our country, India, toward the fag end of the Mughal rule, which ruled in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, we have got the British. They came, actually, they came unofficially from 1727, 1747, but officially, if you count 1857, the Sipai Mutiny, the first war of independence, that continued for roughly 90 years until 1947 when India became independent. That's also around the time, if you see 19th century and early part of 20th century, Africa in various shapes and sizes and kinds, it also underwent this colonial experience, some good and some not so good, which we also discussed in the previous 4 classes. The British, they came, the French, the Belgians, the Portuguese, Mozambique, Domingo's place, I think the Portuguese, they came there. Like the Portuguese, they came to Indian part of Goa, for example. And I will not dismiss everything. Like when I was in Goa a couple of years ago on a visit, I did go to some Portuguese church. I think it's a very excellent architectural kind of thing. So there are a lot of cultural embeddedness. They also left, I think, a lot of heritage kind of thing. So we should not only look at things from a micro or a macro perspectives, but I think, and in a very limited Milo, but I think it is very important to understand and appreciate the colonial culture and its impact. Okay, obviously certain negative things did happen, but also certain positive things and certain other developments also took place during this long colonial struggle. And again, as I said, in Africa, for example, different countries, they have different kind of impact. Okay, the Britishers and the French, okay, one colonial power, they wanted more centralization like France, but on the other hand, the Anglophone, the countries which was colonized by Great Britain, they believe little bit more on the decentralization, like top down and bottom up kind of thing. So again, there is again pluses and minuses, upside, downside on both the things. If you centralize too much, okay, maybe you can take a quick decisions, you can make a judgment call, etc., etc. But if you need to, but on the other hand, there is also like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if there is too much concentration, there is also the downside. On the other hand, if you go for a decentralization path, if you just delegate too many things, okay, it is maybe the workload will be less, but in the process, the codification or, for example, the collectivization of the decision-making process may get diverged and diffused. So that may create confusion, that may also be, may not serve the interest of the people that you do. So the colonial legacy, I also highlighted in one of my classes how, for example, in the education sector, like in India, we have got a lot of universities like Presidency colleges in Kolkata, in Mumbai, even in my state in Odisha. I graduated from a college called Ravenshaw that was created by British colonel in mid-19th century, around I think 1860 or 67. I can give you many number of examples throughout this country and also throughout different parts of Africa. Definitely the British, they did cultivate, they did nourish a kind of educated elite. So you did not have any educated elite before, which are very familiar, which are also very upfront about English language, about upward mobilities, etc., etc. So I think to that extent, I think that really helped. Even our leaders, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi, and many other leaders, so they also went abroad to London to learn, to earn the degrees of law. And I think that also enlightened their world views. Like, for example, we read about how Gandhi, when he spent the time in London to become a lawyer, like a barrister, he was influenced by Fabian socialism, the socialist thoughts and Marxist thoughts, etc. He did not borrow all the ideas, but definitely it helps to learn both sides of the aisle and try to make a judgment. I mean, which system may suit India the best. Same thing with Africa. There was an educated elite, there's an educated class, Even during the colonial times, they did go to the Western countries. They went to US, to different in UK and many other countries. So when they came back, they came with a new enlightened ideas and they tried to experiment that. I think to a lot extent, I think it did help in creating a base, a knowledge base of educated elites kind of thing. Okay, but on the downside, the thing is this indigenous language, not everybody was privileged enough to go to US or to Western countries because of financial reasons, because some other socioeconomic disadvantages. So there is this mismatch between these educated elites and the non-elites. So I think that was also another side of the story. Nationalism and its legacies. Nationalism, the spirit of nationalism, again, the level and the speed of nationalism was there, the spirit was there in different countries, from Kenya to Liberia to Malta to South Africa to on different places. But I think it picked up at different levels in different ways because of the intrinsic indigenous impact of the local cultures, the local elites, the local factors like that. The problems of statehood, integration, and legitimization. Again, when you say the statehood, I mean, it's not like you create a state overnight. It takes a lot of times to put all the things together. Just because you have a territory, just because you have a sovereignty, just because you have a marked things like that. A state is not born overnight. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Even in our country, it took us literally 2.5 years, close to 3 years, to come up with a constitution that we all can agree with, and we can develop and we can forge a consensus. So that's not easy. Same thing happened in Africa also, in different countries. Some places it took us little more, some places it took less. But nevertheless, the statehood and all the things that comes with it, the integration and legitimization. This word legitimization is also very important. You can create a state, but you cannot create a state out of vacuum. The state has to earn its place under the sun, and the state has to acquire legitimacy. Unless the state is considered or viewed as legitimate by the people living in that state, the state cannot function. Because at the end of the day, the people, you believe in popular sovereignty. The people are supreme. The people run. Okay, so you cannot just wishy-washy, or you cannot just isolate, or you cannot marginalize the people on this way, that way. So legitimization is very important, and also integration. And when you say integration, not only integration from a legal point of view, but integration is also very, very important from an emotional integration. Like I love my country, or I am a patriotic person. Even though there are a lot of things I do not like in the country, I still, at the end of the day, I salute the flag. I sing the national anthems. I feel proud of being an Indian. So a lot of times, I think within the country, a lot of times we do critique that this thing is not good, it is not in the right direction. But when we go outside the country, and I believe I have been to many countries in the world, around the world, and whenever people ask me about what is going on in India in terms of this particular law, that particular episode, things like that, I always try to put a very positive spin to it, positive aspect to it, because I feel that I am like an ambassador, like I am a goodwill ambassador to an outside world. Because from me, this is an intellectual outlet that they good. But within the country, we do have differences, we do have arguments, and I think argument is okay. I think dialogue and discussions and debate is a good thing. Like in social science, in all the humanities, and one of the things we learn is critical thinking. We need to think critically. And I think that's very, very important, because that's how you develop a very nuanced view of different complex matters. Okay. Like I remember when I took the classes in US, a number of courses, usually we discuss things in terms of opposing viewpoints, opposing perspectives. I remember one class I took was on international law, which was, and the class was on American involvement or America's intervention in Vietnam. Okay. And the teacher, this was like a class of, let us say, 45, 50 students. I happen to be one of them. There are a lot of American students, a lot of British students, a lot of foreign students were there, myself included. So the teacher randomly picked up 2 students from the class, and I happened to be one of them. So he asked me to come to the front of the class. He said, okay, you defend America's intervention in Vietnam. And another student was assigned to oppose America's America's intervention in Vietnam. And the teacher gave us a couple of books, couple of articles, and 1 week time. The subsequent week, I went to the class and I made a 15-20 minute presentation defending American involvement in Vietnam. As you all know, this was called America's longest war. It started somewhere around mid-50s during Eisenhower when he was the president. It continued through John F. Kennedy, through Lyndon Johnson, through Richard Nixon, until Gerald Ford, and the war ended at that particular time, okay, at a heavy cost. So emotionally, if you ask me, did I like America's intervention? The answer is no. But I was assigned this particular task to defend it from an intellectual point of view, from an academic point of view. I think that's the thing. I think we should do that in all classes, even in this particular class or in all courses. We always need to see the opposite side, the opposing arguments. I think that way you can see the things in a black and white perspective, and you can develop a more holistic view or holistic approach to that. So yes, integration is important, legitimization is important. That word legitimacy is very, very important, and it has to be a genuine legitimacy, not a funny one. Issues of development, again, this is also important. The development process in Africa in general in 19th, 20th century, because of a variety of reasons, it was not even, there was no level playing field, rather it was a very uneven field. In some places, for example, like if you pick South Africa, for example, definitely it was in a much more affluent and much more in the upper level, upper rich kind of thing. But in some other places, Liberia, Upper Volta, Gambia, Congo, etc., for a variety of reasons, the development pace of development was not that fast enough. In some places, it was like Egypt, for example. During some time, like Nasser's time, etc., it went up, okay? But due to variety of reasons, due to military coup or things like that, it's like one step forward and few steps backward, okay? So I think it, again, there are differing perspectives in terms of the development approach. But nevertheless, the development was happening. Even if it is a small baby step, it's almost like when a baby is born, okay? The baby first tries to crawl, okay? Then tries to stand up, then falls down, then it tries to run, then tries to really compete for the Olympics or things like that. So everything happens in gradual manner, in stages. So the same thing, if you apply the same metaphor in the case of development of various African states, it was happening more or less. Things were moving, but not at the same speed all at the same time because of the variety and divergence in terms of the different internal and intrinsic factors that was there in different countries in Africa. The types of regimes in terms of that, which is in Unit 6 we discussed, we have got the authoritarian regimes, we have got the military regimes, military coups that takes place even today also. I think if you pick up a lot of countries, I think it is not very stable. The military, they take over, and even if there are some democratic entities or democratic regimes in some places, at the most it is very fragile because the root is not very strong in terms of the governance, in terms of its acceptance, and also the point that I just said a few minutes ago in terms of legitimacy. So types of regime, authoritarian regimes, very authoritarians, that I know everything, it's my way or the highway, that kind of things, okay? So authoritarianism, they don't listen to the dissent, any differing opinions. It is all imposed by one person from the top. It's like very imperial in nature. The democratic things take everybody along, like our Prime Minister says, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. We want the development, we want the progress of everybody. Let us earn the trust of everybody and let us move along. The military coups, in some places, the tribal chieftains, they are also very, very powerful. So I think the types of regimes are also very much varied. Some places they have got monarchies, and they have got also, even within monarchies, some people believe in limited monarchy, some people believe in absolute monarchy. So I think in different types and different ways, different regimes that took place. To be fair to different regimes, they did try in their own, even if you pick like Nasser of Egypt, let us say Gaddafi of Libya, okay, or Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, or Jimmy Kenyatta from Kenya, or Nkrumah in Ghana. You pick one, any person, okay, even de Klerk in South Africa during the whiteist apartheid regimes, everybody tried to do something meaningful. Maybe they were not successful for a variety of reasons. Maybe it was not accepted by the people per se. Maybe there was a steep opposition, steep resistance to it. But nevertheless, I think different ways in different levels they did try. Administration, military, and political parties. One of the problems that we see across the board in Africa is, in general, okay, there may be exceptions here and there, is the civil hyphen military relations that was not clearly marked, that was not clearly delineated. I think that's a very, very important point that I think we need to remember. Unlike, for example, in our country here in India, the civil military relations are completely divorced, are completely segregated, completely compartmentalized. This is civil, this is military. You do XYZ, you do 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, and usually the civilian governments, the civilian authorities, they are kind of the big boss. They take the real decisions. The military, they also play a very supporting kind of things. So that's the reason why a lot of people ask me, I mean, how come in India you don't have a military coup or you don't have a military dictatorship? We are not perfect. We also make mistakes. There are a lot of shortcomings, a lot of loopholes in our systems as well. But even if it is not completely faultless, since 1947 till today, we have got 7, 8 decades, 75 years or whatever. Okay, we still have a democratic entity in spite of shortcomings, weaknesses, etc., etc. Because what we have done is, and that is a part of the constitution, and that is also accepted by both the civilian leadership and also the military leaderships, that this is my turf, this is my boundary, this is my areas, and I need to discuss that. But if I need to discuss some things, for example, job prospects, post-retirement benefits, some other incentives from the promotion cases, etc., from the military, they do discuss that. So there is a mechanism where a military person or a military brigades or regimes, they can also discuss that in a very meaningful, constructive ways. Okay, they can put forth their ideas, their inputs and feedback. A lot of times that is taken into consideration. So there is a clear-cut distinction between the civil and the military. But look at the other countries, even in our own continent. Look at Pakistan. Look at Bangladesh. Okay? I mean, Bangladesh was created in 1971. And today is what, 2025. During that period, we have seen how the first Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Mujibur Rahman, he got killed along with his family. We have got military governments by Ziaur Rahman, military governments by Hassan Muhammad Irsad. Then we have seen how Hasina Wajed, she lost her powers. Okay, you look at Pakistan, Field Marshal Ayub Khan, he was there in the 60s, followed by Yahya Khan in the late 60s, early 70s. Then in the late 80s and 90s, we have Parvez Musharraf. So, and there, I mean, the distinction between the civil and military are completely mixed up, are completely messed up, are completely enmeshed. Okay? In Africa, for example, a lot of countries in Africa, they did not have a very concrete kind of distinction or demarcation of power or authorities between civil and the military things. And I think that has created a lot of complication, and that has also impeded or at least affected the creation of a genuine democratic regimes or a democratic society. I mean, what is a democratic society? For the most part, it believes in openness, it believes in transparency, it believes in accountability, it believes in give and take, it believes in consultation, dialogue, discussions, it believes in checks and balance. No single person or single authority can be powerful. Okay, I think that is the very basic kind of requirement or basic ingredient in any democratic entities, with different variations, of course. But look at Africa. in many places, the dissent is not allowed. There is a censorship of the press, censorship of the medias. You cannot, there are many countries in Africa where you don't have free access to, you can use WhatsApp or you can use the internet or whatever things you can write in the Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, etc. You cannot write freely. Let us say you have got a strong opinion about a particular government's policy or a particular institution. You cannot freely write in a newspaper, or you cannot freely speak about it in a radio station or in a television station. If you do, there is a possibility that you may be arrested, you may be penalized, or you may be put to some inconvenience, etc. So I think that shows the weaknesses and the shortcomings of this process of democratization. But slowly and surely, I think a lot of things are changing. For example, nobody imagined that, for example, in South Africa, that one day we'll see the end of apartheid regimes. I remember when I was in US to do my doctoral degrees in early 80s, I went in 83. During those days, 83, 84, 85, I do have a program on African Studies program. And every day between, I think, 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock during this lunch hour kind of things, I've seen through the window of my class, number of professors, number of students, they march against South African apartheid policies because the university that I went to, they invested, they put a lot of money in the South African banks, etc., investment, etc. So basically, the request was for the university administration to disinvest, to withdraw the money from those South African entities or South African government, and try to put some pressure or pressurize the South African government to desegregate and to go for a complete policy of, to end the policy of racial segregation or end the policy of apartheid. That ultimately happened in mid-80s when de Klerk, he gave up. Okay, then we have got a multiracial governments. Okay, and the post-apartheid governments had its first president in the form of Nelson Mandela from African National Congress. So it takes time. It takes time at different places. In South Africa, it took a long, long time. And in other countries also, it has taken some time to perpetuate democratic institutions. Africa and the world economy, again, that concept of the dichotomy of dependency versus interdependence that came along, okay? And a lot of these African states, they fell into the debt trap, okay? Because once you borrow a heavy amount of money from, let us say, from World Bank or IMF or any other international bodies, okay, and you are unable to pay back, okay, again, you are put into the debt kind of thing. Okay, so that is again a big problem. The other day I was reading an article about the Chinese investment in many different African countries. And I think what is happening in case of China is they're very smart, they're very clever. So they deliberately give a good liberal dose of financial aid to different countries, knowing fully well that they cannot pay back on time. And the Chinese, they try to exploit, they try to make use of the dependence of Chinese currency or Chinese economy, Chinese investments. And in the process, China tries to expand its own spheres of influence in different African countries, and the African countries they are beholden. Because, you know, there is a saying called, there is nothing called a free lunch. Nobody gives any free lunch. You have to pay for it. It can be paid in cash, or it can be paid in some kind of other leverages, in some other kind of influences, or you have to surrender certain things, or you have to give up certain things, or you have to toe or follow certain kinds of foreign policy objectives of that particular country, even if you do not like it, because that's a price you have to pay in lieu of getting a generous dose of financial aid. So I was reading an article, and that was pretty interesting, like the broad spectrum of this BRI, Belt and Road Initiatives, One Belt, One Road, not only in this part of the world, the string of pearls all around India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Maldives, etc., but also in different parts of Africa. And I wrote an article a couple of years ago in a journal, Indian Foreign Affairs Journal in Delhi, where I tried to put it in a comparative context, how the three countries, namely China, Japan, and India, all of them are trying to penetrate deeply inside the trade and commercial potential of individual countries. But while as China is becoming more muscular and more aggressive in the design, in India's case and in Japanese case, they are following a more benign policies in terms of trade and commerce, in trying to develop capacity buildings, in trying to encourage the African countries to stand up on their own legs and trying to become self-sufficient in their own ways. Okay, so there are a lot of statistics that shows, but China is way ahead. I think if you do some research or prepare a project report, you can go to Google, you can find a lot of articles coming up how China very cleverly is trying that, at least since the last 30 years, since the end of in the post Mao Zedong or in the post Deng Xiaoping's period, and during Jiang Zemin's, Hu Jintao, and of course in the last 10 or 15 years under Xi Jinping's government. So I think under the grab of quote unquote peaceful rise, that is official policy of China, it tries to be a big influencer in African politics. And I was in the morning class, I believe I said how China is trying to play a double game, in the sense that China wants a bipolar world, meaning China and US, United States of America and China, as a co-hegemon, co-competitor, co-partner, and co-facilitator. But in terms of Asian continent, it wants a unipolar Asia. It wants the entire position, 1, 2, 3, everything by itself. It doesn't allow any rival, any competitor to rival China's rise, whether it is India or Korea or Japan or any other countries. Okay. Anyway, so that's a separate one. But in Africa, please remember, China does have a lot of vested interest. They have invested a lot of money, materials, etc., and they try to exert that influence over there. So you can call it, like, in a sense, like a neo-colonial power, not exactly a colonial power in the sense of exploiting raw materials, etc., but trying to put the kind of the sovereignty in a very closet way, in a sneaky way, so that you become dependent on China for a long term. Cold War non-alignment on Africa, which is Unit 9, I said how during the Cold War, from 1945 to 90, at least the beginning part of the Cold War, many countries in Africa, they were under the colonial impact of the colonial rule. But one by one, once India became independent and Sri Lanka, Indonesia, from different colonial masters, I think in the late 40s and early 50s, most of the African countries, one by one, slowly and steadily and surely, they also become decolonized. But the downside was, in the Cold War, what is Cold War? Cold War means the war between the two superpowers at that time, 1945 to 1990, that 45 years. Which was the two superpowers? United States of America, Soviet Union. USA, US, SU, Soviet Union. So those two countries, they did not come directly face to face on any particular geographical or territorial areas, whether it is in any part of Africa or whether it is Congo. They did it through sneaky ways, like the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in Congo, and even many other regime change in different ways. Okay, if it is not to the liking of KGB, the Secret Service of Russia, Soviet Union, or CIA, Central Intelligence Agency of US, okay, they tried to change the governments, okay, one way or the other, okay, by hook or by crook, okay. Same thing, they did that in a broader scale in Cuba, in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany, in many places, okay. So that thing was like cat and mouse kind of game that happened with them. So basically, I think both the superpowers, United States and Soviet Union, they played a proxy game, a proxy war, without coming directly head on against one another. They tried to use the different proxy governments. And I think, unfortunately, even in parts of Africa, they also become they fell a prey to it, and they had to pay a heavy price for that. So that was the Cold War. But in the post-Cold War, I think things did change. The Soviet Union disappeared. It dismembered into several republics, Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, all those Georgian republic. Okay. So I think then America was a sole superpower. And in the 21st century, at the beginning of this century, we have got a more assertive global south, okay, mostly consisting of countries from Africa, Latin America, and other places, Caribbean, etc. They are also were in the forefront. Non-alignment, that was again another attractive proposition for African countries, particularly the countries did not like to take sides with this particular colonial power or that one, whether it is British or French or Belgium or Germany or Portuguese or even United States of America, which is now a very big power in the 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. So non-alignment was an idea, a brainchild developed by our first Prime Minister Nehru, and which was also ably supported by people like Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and Nkrumah of Ghana, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Jim Kenyatta from Kenya, and Nkrumah from Ghana, Sukarno from Indonesia, many other people, they jumped into the bandwagon. They felt that it makes sense not to put all eggs in one basket, not to be aligned with any particular country in an official way, in an overt way. Okay? No military alliances, and let us keep it open. If somebody wants to help us financially or economically, they are most welcome to do so, but without any strings attached to it. No strings attached to it, no conditionalities. But if somebody is genuinely interested to see that a particular country A or B or C gets developed, okay, through some generous assistance, they are most welcome to do it. I think India tried to adopt that path. I think a lot of the African countries, they felt this is a good way of moving, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the decolonization process in the post-colonial states, and that was the formative stage. And that's, I think, very, very important. And a lot of countries, they did follow that. But the difference was in India, we tried to adapt to our own indigenous conditions in our own needs. The other countries, in that case, although they started up in the late 40s and early 50s with a spirit of non-alignment, not aligning with any countries, but in due course of time, some military people, some civilian people, some bureaucrats, okay, they tried to side one or the other for some vested interest, and ultimately it was almost like one step forward and 3 steps back. So it was a big setback in that particular way. But non-alignment did catch a lot of attention among number of African countries, and I think they felt that this is a very attractive proposition, and this is a ideology that best suits some of these African countries. United Nations peacekeeping in Africa, when UN was created at the end of World War II in 1945, the UN, among other things, they emphasized on decolonization, they emphasized on ending discrimination, ending apartheids, ending the different kinds of disparities, economic disparities between the continents, because Africa was, as you know, for a long time, it was known as the dark continents. And it was definitely, if you compare with other continents, Africa had a lot of catch up to do. So the UN did help not only through the main bodies, United Nations General Assembly, Security Council, but also through the specialized agencies, UNICEF, UNESCO, WHO, World Health Organization, ICAO, FAO, Food and Agriculture. So different bodies, they also gave appropriate representation on a geographical basis to all continents, including Africa. Okay, like for example, the head of WHO, he's from Ethiopia. Dr. Kofi Annan, who was the UN Secretary General, he was also from Africa. So Africa got its due place, but they have to really struggle out, and at the end of the day, they did get that. The peacekeeping operations, that was also very much there in different parts. As far as India is concerned, as I have said before, India was at the forefront in terms of the peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building operations in many different parts of Africa. whether it is Angola, whether it is Mozambique, whether it is Congo, whether it is South Sudan, and many different times and many different ways. So that's why the Indian peacekeeping troops, I think they have developed a good rapport or a good reputation. And I think a lot of times they went there, they also tried to cultivate good relationships in terms of developing the infrastructure, in terms of developing good governance, or at least a semblance of good governance in those countries. Okay, it reminds me, like in the 1960s, United States of America, they had something similar to peacekeeping operation called the U.S. Peace Corps. That was in the 60s during John F. Kennedy and during Lyndon Johnson's time. Lot of when Jimmy Carter, the U.S. president who recently died at the age of 100, when he was the president in 1976 to 1980 in America, in USA, he visited Delhi. I remember in 77 when Morarji Desai was the prime minister. He visited a small place in Haryana, which is very close to Delhi. And that place he visited, and that was named after uh, uh, Carter, called Carter Puri. And the reason why he chose this place, because his parents, they were the Peace Corps volunteers in that tiny village in Haryana. So there are Peace Corps volunteers. They also did similar kind of roles in terms of uh, developing female literacy, trying to end malnutrition among children, and child mortalities, and trying to develop certain kinds of a model kind of educational system, model kind of governance systems. So that was the peacekeeping roles, to keep peace and trying to separate the different warring factions, and also trying to see that a democratic government or entity is being finally established. But of course, they have to pay a lot of steep price. A lot of times they also had to sacrifice their lives. A lot of times the peacekeeping troops, they had to lose their hands or legs or some bodies because of the mines that has been planted on the ground. So they did took a lot of calculated risk to their body, to their lives, etc. But in spite of that, they chose to go to those countries, those troubled zones, those strife-torn countries, as part of the peacekeeping troops and as ordained by the United Nations. The post-Cold War Africa, I just discussed that a few minutes ago, which was there since post-1990s. Since then, I think things have become a little bit better in terms of more organized kind of settings, because of more enlightenment, more knowledge, more awareness. And they also got different agencies, different, like for example, uh, the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, they invested huge amount of money in number of African countries, and one of their prime target was to end these cases of malaria, smallpox, polio eradication. So I think they put a lot of money into that, and I think that did help to alleviate the situation of the health crisis that is happening there. Just before COVID-19, there was a pandemic called Ebola that also affected a lot of the African countries. African countries, they also suffered a lot during H1N1, during swine flu, and many other endemic diseases and pandemics for which there was no vaccine. And even if there was some vaccines that was being developed, they did not have the means or the financial prowess to buy those things or distribute that among the wide section of people. I think thanks must go to the government of India, which in spite of not being a very rich country, still went out and extended its hand of friendship and cooperation by giving very generously the COVID-19 vaccines to different countries in Africa, Covishield, Covaxin, and many other things. So I think the people of Africa, they remember that, because, there is a saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed. I think India did help meaningfully, not only to the other countries in Africa, but also among the South Asian countries and many other countries that needed its help. The human security, I think that is also very, very important, as I have discussed in the last class, okay? And human security, it comes with different shapes and different manifestations, health security, food security, economic security, political security, environmental security. So, human security is a very broad spectrum. And I think the idea was to make it people-centric, make it very universal, not parochial, not segmented in any particular class. And it has to be done in a both qualitative as well as quantitative terms. So I think to a large extent, I think the different countries, they try to develop a situation of human security to make it more safe, more secure, and more clear, and so that there will be a balanced level field across the different African countries. Again, as I said, the human security has got issues in health security so that people can get basic ideas. Like in the morning, I discussed about the international humanitarian law, where I think the basic rights of the people, I think you can put that also in terms of the health security, like the social security, etc. The food security, everybody is entitled to get the minimum amount of the food that they need for nutrition, for their sound health, etc. Economic security, environmental securities, free of pollution, etc. Human security in Sub-Saharan Africa had its issues because for a long time they had to face issues of war, poverty, hunger, health, corruption, bureaucratic apathy, the non-implementation or partial implementation of MDJ and SDG, namely United Nations Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals. It was only practiced in bits and pieces, not in a very wide areas. The problem of these countries, I think, was still there in many countries. Hunger, ill health, ethnic conflict, social disintegration, transmutable disease, the depletion of the natural resources, and when you add refugee influx, terrorism, drug trafficking, proliferation of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, I think you got a big mess that is happening in the human security. So the United Nations and the specialist agencies, they did try to reach out to those places and trying to do whatever they can. I think at least the human security issues now is getting a prime attention among number of countries in Africa, and the other countries outside in the Western world, in America and other places, they're also paying attention to that. In terms of the Unit 13, deterritorialization and problems of social identities, I told you what is called deterritorialization. It means removing the indigenous people from their homeland. Okay, so you remove them from their own habitat, but that is also creating a big cultural gap. That is also creating a lot of cultural vacuums, because you cannot just take away the people from one place and trying to implant them in another one. And there needs to be a proper nourishment and proper hybridization, etc. So I think that also created problems in creating a very model nation state or a model societies, etc. So that took a lot of times in terms of developing a more forward-looking, more benign, more liberal, more a conjoined ethnic identities. In some ways, the OAU, Organization for African Unity, they did try to do something about it in terms of developing a model nation state, etc., in tune with the different identities, different groups, different cultures, etc., across different religions. Islam was there, Christianity was there, and many other things, and the tribal cultures that was there. The ethnic politics that also played a role in the different African societies, ethnic nationalism, the ghettoization, that is also very, very important, because the different tribes, they have a tendency of staying together. I remember when I was in US, I heard this term called ghettos, the black ghettos, the Hispanic ghettos, the Latino ghettos, because basically it's like a cluster kind of things, okay? For example, you go to New York, a big city, you go to a place like Brooklyn or Bronx, there is this ghetto kind of things. That because when you belong to you perceive to be an endangered ethnic community or an endangered race kind of things, you try to mix along or go along or stay along with the same or similar kind of people with similar kind of thinking. So in a way, it is good, but the downside is you do not go out of the box. You do not try to improve, or you do not try to reach out what the mainstream society does. Okay, so it becomes a very myopic kind of things in many ways, because the society is heterogeneous and the societies. So the tribal solidarity was there, ethnic enclaves is there, the tribal values are there, norms and structures are there. Okay, and it is also accepted broadly that there are most people, they do bear multiple identities. But having said that, I think again it goes back to the big sociological debate that we see in sociological discourse is between Anglo-conformity and cultural pluralism, between melting pot and a salad bowl. Melting pot means people coming from different Western countries or different places, and they melt or they merge all their identities and rolled into one single entity in a monolithic ways. That is called the melting pot things. That is called Anglo-conformity. You conform to the Anglo-Saxon traditions, okay? That is one way of looking at this ethnic discourse, or even in Africa and many other countries. The other argument is you do not look at people in terms of one single homogeneous entity, rather a combination, a sum total of heterogeneous cultures, heterogeneous races, heterogeneous tribes. Okay, each one of these tribes or ethnic entities or ethnic enclaves, they maintain, they retain their own identities, their heritage, and that is what Milton Gordon says, the cultural pluralism models. That's what he says, the salad bowl concept. Okay, so I think if you are interested to know that the sociological debates, the larger debate, I think there are a lot of good books written by Gabriel Sachter, written by Nathan Glaser, Daniel Moynihan, many other scholars. They've written very extensively about it. I think you can know about it. So, and again, this migration between the rural area and the urban areas, that also did affect the process of development in some of those areas. In terms of the economic cooperation and continental and regional organizations, number of bodies that come along: OAU, ADB, African Development Banks, Lagos Plan of Action in 1980, more popularly known as LPA, the Abuja Treaty of 1991. I think basically all of these things, the LPJ Guidehouse, I think you can see page 141, and the 7 priority areas that they worked into as part of the Lagos in terms of the LPA, the Lagos Plan of Actions. Africa's huge resources must be used primarily to meet the needs and purpose of the people. Africa's total reliance on the export of raw materials must change. In terms of self-reliance, Africa must mobilize all the human and material resources for the development. These efforts should enhance the move toward African economic integration, and national governments should develop economic, social, and cultural policies that are informed by the LPA. So I think LPA was a big leap forward in terms of areas like food and agriculture, to develop self-sufficiency, human resource development, HRD, to eliminate illiteracy, transport, communication, industry. The whole idea was it will lead to sub-regional bodies, and maybe it will lead to something like a European common market, like African common market. Okay, so I think this was a good step forward, and that was taken up further in 2001 by African Union in Lusaka, etc. Again, some of those things got replicated, promoting and maintaining peace and stability in the continent, promoting gender equality. That was a very big issue, because in many parts of Africa, in many countries, the gender inequality was very pervasive. So the idea was to bridge this gap between along the lines of gender and trying to bring them to the mainstream, trying to sensitize the people on human rights, on the rule of law, fostering good governance by applying democratic principles, executing suitable programs and policies of reform in accelerated ways, taking deliberate and definite steps to achieve economic integration, promote socio-economic cooperation along across African states and attracting Africa more investment for growth and expansion. And when I say growth, it has to be a sustainable growth, a sustained growth. It is not like one particular items and then after a couple of years everything getting dried up. So I think a lot of these things that African, so I think it's a continuation of the things that the Lagos Plan of Action, LPA, started out, that was carried forward by African unions, and that was even further taken forward by NEPAD, which is the new partnership for Africa's development. And since then, I think there has been a lot of other organizations in Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, Northern Africa. I think you must have come across the Economic Community of West African States, South African Development Coordination. The whole idea is trying to find a structure, trying to codify, trying to have a collective views, trying to harmonize the different elements and different inherent strengths, different actors, different stakeholders, and trying to do something tangible, something meaningful about it in all different ways, in social, economic, culture, technologies, IT, medical things, etc., etc. I think in some ways there was a positive movement, okay, but again, it varied from country to country, place to place. But I think overall, at least there is now a greater recognition and greater sensitization of the issues that Africa faced, because now you have got a more educated elite class that is emerging and that is fast emerging. A lot of people who went to other countries in Europe or in US and even India, they are going back and they are trying to give back something. They are trying to contribute something. Just like the way I said the other day, the brain drain is becoming brain gain or brain bank. So when these people are coming back, they come with new ideas, new innovations, new technologies, and they do teach those countries and trying to do something meaningful, something tangible, something which has got a long legs kind of things. In terms of India-Africa relations, which is the last unit, basically the historical period, the colonial period, the Indians in Africa, how they came to different places. And I just gave you in the example, like the Portuguese, they came to Goa, they came to Mozambique. If you see in the way back to the Indian ancient text, I think we did have some people in the Nile River across in the Egypt and other areas. The post-independent period, the government policy, African response, the non-alignment, which we discussed extensively, how that was embraced by different African countries, and South-South cooperation. I mean, there is a category of developing countries, okay? The major countries, USA, France, UK, Belgium, Canada, okay? Like literally kind of G8 or G20 countries, okay? Which has got a big per capita income, etc. Then you have got a middle powers kind of thing. Then you have a small powers. So developing countries, but then there is another thing called underdeveloped country. And then there is another subcategory called LDC, the least developed countries. So in Africa also, we see a South-South kind of mismatch or South-South kind of dichotomy between countries which are developing, not completely developed, okay? They're in the process of development, but there are also countries that are trying to catch up, okay? So it is, I think, incumbent on the developing countries to help out the least developed countries, and at least in all areas, in education, in health, in infrastructure, in industries, and etc., etc. The political cooperation, the India-African relations, globalization and interdependence. We discussed that, how in the process, particularly in the post-1990s, areas of globalization, liberalization, privatization, that did take place. So today, if you go to different countries in Africa, you see semblance of globalization. What the globalization brought was the new technologies, the new ideas, okay, new forms of thinkings, etc. But on the downside, a lot of the indigenous industries, etc., that also got cut off. And also we saw this great power rivalry, etc. But I think overall it has been a positive experience for most of these countries. Regional cooperation we see within intra-African levels and also inter-African levels. And Indian diaspora in Africa. Dr. Sadanand, of course, is an expert on diaspora and all his colleagues. I have also done some limited research on diaspora. Indian diaspora has been there in very significant numbers. You go to countries like literally any countries in African continent, particularly on the eastern side. You go to Kenya, you go to Uganda, you go to Nigeria, you go to South Africa, in the indentured laborers, and in the last 40, 50 years, mostly educated elites, the educated people, the educationists, they go there, they teach, they try to entrepreneurs, the businessmen, the traders, etc., in Uganda and many other places. I can give many, many examples. So this diasporic population over the years, over the centuries, they have also become, quote unquote, what they say is a model minorities. And they have brought a lot of new technologies, new things to the countries of their adoption. So there is a good synergy between the country of origin that they belong, which is India, and the country they adopted over there in those places. And there is now a lot of good universities in different parts of Africa. And you see a lot of Indian professors, Indian educationists, Indian technicians, Indian engineers, they do that. And I think they have left some good impression, positive impressions about the diasporic experiences. They retain their cultural heritage, they retain their cultural pluralisms, but at the same time, they like to do something concrete, something meaningful for those host societies that they have chosen to adopt. So I think the Indian diasporic population has been playing a very splendid, a very sterling roles in different parts of Africa as Africa tries to catch up with the rest of the world and tries to move up in the economic and in the socio-economic ladders. So I think that's all I have to say in this class. Okay, so government things, African response. So I think that's all. Okay, but I think if you need to know more about it, I think there are a lot more that we can learn. I think there are a lot. The good thing is today's world in IT revolution, information communication technologies, there are a lot, it's open access kind of thing. You just open up Google, so you go to any libraries. Those people who are staying in Delhi, for example, I would strongly urge them to go to any of the big libraries. Like I go to the downtown Delhi in Connaught Place in Indian Council for World Affairs, Sapru House. You have got lots of books on Africa, lots of books on societies. So new books, recent books, a lot of articles, a lot of journals. There are different universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi University, Jamia Millia University. We have departments on African studies. They do research on Africa. So I think if somebody would like to know more about Africa or develop a more critical discourse on Africa, there are places, there are universities, there are think tanks, there are educational outreach programs. I think that can help you. Similarly, to do with diasporic experience, we have Indira Gandhi National Open Universities. Dr. Sadanand is an esteemed member of that. In University of Hyderabad, University of Gujarat, and many other universities around the countries, they do have a very vibrant diasporic discourse programs, curriculum development, etc. We do have a lot of upright scholars, and I think if somebody would like to do some research, a quality research, I think there are a lot of possibilities, a lot of potentialities. So again, I think it has been a real pleasure teaching all of you. I really enjoyed teaching all of you. So I'm looking forward to teach, to give some lectures, maybe learn a lot of things from you. So knowledge is something which is reciprocal. So you tell me a lot of interesting, innovative things. I also tell you something based on my knowledge, based on my experience and expertise. And I would like to disseminate those knowledge, because that's the way I think we can move up in the ladder. We can be like a building block, and as we move along. So again, wish you all the best on their respective professions, respective areas that you work on your professional lives, in your personal and professional endeavors. So I wish you all the best and good luck. So any quick questions, any quick comments from anyone? Domingo, any quick questions? Daktaru, Karan, Vinod?
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So thanks you. It has really been a great pleasure. Okay, so I'm very appreciative of Dr. Sadanand and as part of this program, Masters in Migration and Diaspora, of giving me.
Thank you also so much. And
yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.